Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Beast Must Die. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we pick up on the boat. Now, I brought it up last episode. I knew things were going to play out the way they did, where I knew Francis wasn't going to go through with killing George. I just wasn't sure about what the circumstances, like how was he going to get off this boat alive, because she was dead set on killing him and everything, and just like the way George's demeanor was, it was kind of a little off. I'm like, does he know something, does he not, because he's playing coy. But it turns out he throws up a picture of Marty, because he's like, right, would you think I wouldn't find out? It actually didn't take that much. I mean, Googling to find out, like, wait, you're this boy's dad, mom, and it's like, okay, so now he's like, I figured it all out, why you got so close to me. He's even got a weapon, even threatening her. It's like, what were you hoping to get, like a confession out of me? He's like, oh, I know what you were actually trying to do. Like, he was almost basically figuring out, like, wait, you were going to kill me, and even at one point threatening her, and because Francis says she saw George for who he really is, and this is that moment he tries to be, he's such an, let's face it, an asshole but he comes off, tries to be so charismatic. But this is where you just get rid of all that, like all that facade, and the real him comes to the bubbling to the surface, because he's like, I could beat you to death with this, and you'd have to crawl out of here through your own blood or whatever, because I'm that angry right now. It's like, mother effer, you murdered her son potentially, and you got the audacity to be pissed about it. And he's the one that's so callous about it, because she's asking questions like it's like, what do you want? And she's just, I want to know, like, because at first he was like, well, you're almost trying to put it on Marty. He's like, oh, he was the one walking alone. She's like, he wasn't alone, because she had sadly, she took her eyes off him for 1 second, and that's all it took. And so for him, he's trying to throw it back at her, being like, she's like, what was, did he suffer? Did he see it coming? Like, what happened? He was like, no, he looked surprised. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe because it's like, because George tried to make it seem like he's the victim in this situation. It's like, oh, you just assumed it was me. He's like, if the roles were reversed, you'd accuse me of racial profiling. I'm like, really, mother effer? You are involved in it. And the fact is, you had to, but it's like, the fact is, it's one of those things, when you get caught in something, you have to go above and beyond. Like, how dare you even accuse me? It's that type of thing. But George is the asshole that he is, so he has to go above and beyond. Like, he didn't even have to make the remarks he did. Because, like, I kind of also kept getting the feeling like George actually wasn't the one that technically killed Marty. I kind of kept getting that feeling. But now it's like, yeah, like, take us back to shore. And it's just kind of like, and that's the sad thing for Francis. Like, this is all she had. Like, this revenge plot against George was all she had. Like, would it have resolved everything? No. But when the one thing that you've been living for, the one thing you have, like, you set your mind to, and it falls apart, and he's just smug. And he's going to twist it around like, oh, stay away from my family, or I'm going to accuse you of getting close to my family so that you could get close to, Philip, trying to make it seem like she's a predator. So, because at first he was like, yeah, you think you have nothing left to lose, but you do. Like, I will ruin and destroy your reputation and everything. And it's just, it's heartbreaking, even to the point, like, obviously she keeps seeing Marty everywhere, and I think for her it almost feels like, it's like she feels like she let him down. I wasn't able to get justice, I wasn't able to get revenge, so she walks out into the water. I was like, she's like, the moment she started taking herself off, I was like, she's gonna kill herself, and she goes into the water. Luckily she doesn't, but she's luckily alive, but she, and you see, like, Nigel, because it's like, right, like, it's sure in his mind, it's like, if I had done more, like, if maybe, it's not just on him, it's on a lot of people. I mean, it's Garrity who's the one that screwed the pooch, and the Kates in particular. But it's like, because obviously the guy that he's working with, Nigel's working with, kind of points out, like, okay, he fills in, like, some of the stuff that, what was it, George had talked about a couple episodes ago, or maybe an episode or two ago, where he was starting that project, but the project had to get shut down because they found bats in it. And it turns out, like, 20 minutes after Marty got hit, like, or like half an hour, 20 minutes to like half an hour or whatever, George's car was seen, like, in a particular, like, around roughly, like, what, half a mile away from the area, and then it just disappeared. So it's still, like, for that cop, it's like, yeah, like now it's like, yeah, George did it, didn't he? And Nigel's like, yeah, I'm starting to really think he did. Because that project got shut down. So I think they were implying later on that's why they haven't been able to find the car, because they didn't know that George had this connection to this place, like this project that was going to eventually be turned into like a golf course and cafe and all that type of stuff. I think it was like he had hit the car there, and that's why they weren't able to find it. Like how he was able to, like, because the question was like, did he get the car off the island or whatever? It's like, no, it's been there the entire time. He owns the property, but the property's been shut down. It was a perfect place to hide it because no one was going there because the project was shut down because of the bats and everything. So they've been kind of setting that up for a little while, considering, like I said, they told that aspect of that venture that he was working on, which is so interesting because it seemed like he was still trying to push for that. Because I was like, what were you going to do with the car? I guess when enough of it died down, he would have found a different means of getting rid of it, or maybe still hid it there. I don't know. But now, after he got back home, well, because initially, but first and foremost, the fact is the family's at the table and everything, and I forgot what it was like. It's like, like Philip had made some remark about like, yeah, that's probably his dad probably went out for a drive or something like that, and Joy made some like side remark about like, yeah, like he, probably, nothing really stimulating here, he's never had anything stimulating here, referencing the marriage. And then Philip's just like, why are you such a bitch? And she's like, excuse me, what'd you say? He said, I said, why are you such a bitch? And she's like, apologize. He's like, you apologize. And just like, she slaps him, he throws stuff, and then she's just kind of like, you have Joy like, almost like, aren't you going to do something? Violet's like, what do you expect when you talk to me that way? It's just like, oh, yo. Then you have your boy George waltzing in like, oh, like, Frances, she wasn't who she claimed to be. She tried to get our money, but no, she didn't get anything from us. That's what it is. Painting that picture to Violet. And obviously Joy kind of is immediately like, oh, which is so interesting because what did Joy say? She was like, oh, that woman has no interest in you. She looks at you like dinner. But I guess it's like, oh, now it fits. Like, yeah, she wasn't looking at you because she had no interest in you. She was just here for your money and your stuff. To be fair, Joy already had that perspective on Frances to begin with. So it just fit a narrative she had already had in her head. So there's that element to it. But then you could tell it still didn't 100% sit right with Violet, because Violet the entire time was probably thinking like, oh, you went off with Frances, and you whether she knows about the Lena thing, like whether it's like Lena thinks she doesn't know, but when in actuality she does, because she immediately, I'm assuming that was her looking through the window. We never got clarification on who it was looking through the window when George left, but like I said, it could have been a number of people, but I assumed it was like Violet, but it could have been anybody. But I'm thinking it's like she already had an idea, like, right, you're sneaking off to, now it's like, oh, Frances isn't coming back, like you guys shagged it out and you're telling her not to come back or something like that. But he's talking to Philip about like, yeah, she manipulated you. He's like, I don't have anything. And he's like, yeah, but I do. So don't feel bad. It's okay. And then he starts planting the seeds of like, if stuff happened between you. He's like, we don't have to talk about it. We can talk about it later if it comes up. It's like he's setting the seeds. He wants Philip to lie and be like, oh, Frances, there was stuff going on between you, even though there wasn't. It still doesn't take away the fact that sadly, Frances was using him. But I think at the same time, she was using him, but she did kind of give him some confidence in the end, especially because like his dad sure as hell wasn't. So, but especially because like the one like friend and ally he had in this whole situation, he really got close to Frances because she was the only one that didn't see him the way his aunt, as well, in that case, Joy. And we don't really know how he feels about Lena. We didn't really too many interactions. I think they're okay, but I don't think they're like that close. But obviously the people he disdains the most is like has a lot of hatred for his dad and a lot of hatred for Joy. So like that comes as no surprise. But the fact is his dad was setting those seeds and stuff like that. But what I think is interesting is like Lena's not buying any of it. She's like, what'd you do to Frances? And he's like, oh, don't play dumb with me. Like you set this all in motion. She's like, because he's like, you knew the entire time. She's like, what kind of person like do you think I am? It's like the book and everything. He's like, there is no book, because he legit was like, wait, oh, he was actually shocked when he found out like, wait, you actually didn't know that Frances, that little boy, was her son. And it's like, Lena's like, no, you told me it was nothing. And he was like, well, I lied. So then it puts in perspective, because we know that, because at the very least it seemed like Lena was in the car, but then I start thinking, well, maybe Lena wasn't. To be fair, that was the whole point of, like, right, she had the bump on her head and everything, and obviously he has his injured shoulder. So then I start thinking, like, and the way she's breaking down, I'm like, immediately then and there was like, it was Lena behind the wheel, wasn't it? George was in the car, but it was Lena behind the wheel, maybe, like. Because she had said they were kind of arguing, or later on she talks about the fact is that she was kind of drunk, and she woke up in the car. But I'm like, either she was like so out of it that she was driving because he wasn't in the right state of mind either, and he let her drive, and she ended up like passing out at the wheel, or like slipping in and out of consciousness, and ended up hitting Marty in the process. But it makes it even sadder because, like, for one, she got close to Francis. Like, Francis is kind of like, much like Philip, Francis was her own, like what Francis was for Philip, kind of his only ally. Same thing for Lena. It's like, despite everything, the complications of George and everything, she felt like she actually had a friend, someone who was interested in her, and to find out she was being used. But not only that, this thing that's been plaguing you this entire time, you find out, wait, she was the mother. So it's like, how do you, like, what feelings do you feel first? Do you feel the sadness of, oh, Francis's son died and I was partially responsible for that? Or the friend that you thought you made ended up manipulating you? Like, which feelings kind of take priority in that situation? And I think that's why she just bursts into tears, because it's just like everything hitting you all at once. And everyone else is kind of listening in. I don't think everyone gets the full picture. Joy definitely didn't get the full picture, I don't think. I think she was hearing some of the conversation, but her nosy ass, and then she looks at Philip and she does like a witch/cat hiss, like, tss. It's like, wow, you are literally a witch personified. Once again, you always feel bad for the actors, because like when you have to play a terrible human being, the fact is some people, not everyone, some people will just associate that with you, which I never do that. When I'm always talking like that, I always have to specify I'm talking about the character. I'm like, oh, that's a shitty, terrible character. Nothing against the actor themselves. It's like, shows how good of an actor you are when you're able to play into like a despicable human being and kind of lean into it. Like when you're able to make someone hate a character, like that means you've done a good job as an actor. Once again, some people have a hard time differentiating and kind of put that venom towards the actor. Once again, just purely at the character of Joy, but it's like she plays into that, just showing you how despicable. I mean, the same thing for the actor who plays George. He really leans into that despicableness. He leaned into it super well this episode. Like I said, the facade finally like cracked, and you just see how malicious and terrible he is. Once again, Francis saw him for who he is. Lena sees him for who he is. That's why she immediately was like, no, what did you actually do to Francis? Like, why didn't she come back? That whole deal. But like I said, your boy George was setting the groundwork. He was even saying like, oh yeah, like something about a lawyer. And he's like talking to his lawyer. It's like, I need your advice. It's about my sister-in-law, which I'm like, so he was probably like, knowing now that Francis did what she did, he was probably ready to throw her under the bus because it would have fallen on him. So he's probably trying to like, he's probably setting the groundwork to throw her under the bus because she was actually the one driving. Or maybe it actually was George. Because what confused me is like, you see what side of the car she gets on. It's the left side of the car, which obviously this is in Europe, so specifically, because I'm about to say, I do not know all of Europe, so I don't know if that's entirely a European. I know it's a British thing of like the driver's seat being on the right side, the steering wheel and everything. So I'm like, it doesn't seem like it, but that could just be her giving us that perspective of her getting in on that side. But then it's like revealed, it's like, oh, actually, like that's just showing us that perspective. She got out and then got back in on the other side. Or, you know, maybe George was like, oh, would you like to drive? And that's when it happens. We cut away before we get to that. Maybe that's probably going to be a reveal in the next episode or something. But there's that. So there's also the situation with Nigel. I like that, once again, I'm flanking on the cop dude's name, but I like that they've kind of like solidified their relationship, because it's like, they make that whole joke about like, oh yeah, she thinks you're kind of a predator because you don't like, so-and-so says you don't like her dog. Is like, yeah, the dog is blind and it smells bad. He's like, oh, later on, he's like, oh, come on, it has a thyroid issue. So they're in a better place. But he had talked about the fact is, when you first got here, you talked about us kind of not really like having our purpose or whatever. You were 100% right. Because he talks about like, if Garrity, like maybe Garrity can make some excuse of like, right, he wasn't sure at the beginning, but just doing any amount of investigating shows that George did it. So he failed. And it's like, at the very least, that dude's like, at least we have an opportunity to try and make things right now, you know? So, And that whole thing, I think, changed Nigel's perspective on things. So he went to visit Shannon's sister, and obviously she calls him out for all the terrible stuff that he said. He's like, I was drunk, I was lashing out, I needed someone to blame. And he has his panic attack in front of her. And he's like, okay, so the truth is, it's not just like whether or not you'd be able to build up a case. That's not why I didn't want to get involved with your situation. I didn't want to get involved because I didn't want to be taken back there. It's like, what I'm going through right now, you're the only other person that knows I'm going through this. He's like, was going to a therapist for a while, but he kind of dumped me. But he's saying like working is the only thing that kind of brought him any form of like being okay. So he opens up a little bit, and I thought it was interesting like why he was so invested in this case in particular. And the reason is because Francis, he's like, I met a mom who, he's like, my first day here, I met a mom whose son, was killed in a hit and run. And for him, he's like, that woman, I was like, when I met her, I realized like somehow, some shape or form, she found a way to keep moving, like putting one's foot in front of the other. And he thought like if he stuck around her enough, he'd be able to get an answer to it. Like maybe I'd figure my stuff out. But then when she tried to kill herself, it made him realize like, no, she didn't have this figured out. She was just as lost like me. She was looking for answers, and then Shannon's sister's like, you were worried you don't want me to end up like that. He's like, I don't want anyone to end up like that. But she was like, you don't want me in particular to end up like that. He's like, yeah, I don't. Because not getting answers you want, like, no one was there to really help her through everything. So, and he's afraid that like even if Shannon's sister goes down this path, like you might end up like Francis, and he doesn't want that for anybody. Like she nearly died just because of the weight of just not having the answers, and everyone's like struggling their way through their respective situations. So I thought that was a nice like clarity that he got. Because another thing he had brought up before is like, right, he's nervous about the George thing because he doesn't want anything to fall apart. Because like there's too much writing on it. Like Frances already tried to kill herself, and like this might be the only means and opportunity to take George down. Because if they mess up in a little bit, like someone's not wearing the proper gloves, some evidence gets mishandled, this case can so easily get thrown out that it's like he was worried that it's already like slipped through the cracks beforehand because of Garrity, and he doesn't want that to happen again. So all the while, like just as the cops are approaching, getting ready to move out, you have at first, like the moment Violet walks in to check on George, and he was like, the moment he wasn't in bed, I was like, oh boy, someone already got to him, didn't he? And then it's like I was like, is his foot moving? I couldn't tell. I was like, no, I'm gonna let it play out. I'm not gonna rewind. I'm just gonna let it play out. And so she goes into the kitchen. She's like, something's wrong with George, and she's pouring a cup of tea or whatever for herself, and it ends up spilling onto her feet, burning them a little. And she's like, I think something's wrong with George. The cops come a knocking, and then it's like, what's going on? She's like, I think there's something wrong with George. Go in there, George is as good as dead. Which I'm like, I knew it. I knew Francis wasn't going to be doing it. I knew at least someone in the house. There are 3 suspects. It was either Violet, Philip, or Lena that did it. At first I was like, maybe Joy, but like I brought up maybe Joy too, because like everyone has motive. To be fair, like George treated her like shit, but like how brokenhearted she is, she's like, oh, one of you did it. Not unless she's faking it super hard. But obviously it becomes up to the whole thing of like, why were you here in the first place? And then it's like, oh yeah, we're talking about that that little boy. There's a little boy that was hit, and your husband, George, was a suspect. And like, this is like Violet and Philip are getting this the first time. Linda knows, and she's kind of shaken by it. And then Joy's like, no, they don't have a right to look around. But Violet's like, you act like he's already guilty. He's like, does Joy know? Did he confide in her about that? Because she does seem super cagey, like she knew. I was like, uh-oh. And Lena like needs to kind of before she could walk away, it's like, oh yeah, like that woman that was staying with you, Frances, she was Marty's mom. And it's like, ooh, bomb number 2 dropping, and it's like, oh crap, it's one thing after another. Now it's all out there. They're all sitting with that truth. They're like, wait, that's what this is about. I'm curious what Philip's thinking, because it's like, wow, my dad killed Francis's son, and but it's like, yeah, she used me, but it's like, I can understand, like her little boy died. And maybe he feels a little sympathy where it's kind of like, oh, like when she was around me, the reason why she treated me so nicely because she would probably thought of her son. And so once again, Lena tried to paint everything, and even Nigel calls her out. He's like, oh, it's easy to throw George under the bus because the only other person that could contradict your story is dead. But she's like, no, that is what it is. But I'm like, I don't know, man, because even Nigel's kind of getting that feeling like there's got to be something more to this, because it looks like he was probably like overdosed on his painkillers, and obviously we know Violet was aware of them. I'm surprised Philip didn't slice his throat with like a knife, so that's why I'm thinking like it might not be Philip, because Philip had that knife ready for that, but he never used it. I mean, to be fair, let's not forget, he was researching, like, at least stuff for, I think that's going to, well, because that was something I brought up last episode, that, like, Frances would never use any of the methods Philip pointed out to her, like, oh, you can do this and that, because it looked a little too suspicious. Now, in retrospect, it's like, well, maybe it was his pills, or maybe he was poisoned, and now it kind of adds like, oh, it has to be Philip because he was the one that's doing all the research for Frances. So George got his, but it's also the thing of like Frances kind of broke this family in her need for getting justice and revenge. Joyce like getting upset because like, what happened to my brother? It couldn't have like just been an accident. Like nothing just happens, which Lena was like, things just happen, because that's George's perspective on just like the terrible things happen every day or whatever. That was his perspective. And she's like, you know, my mom died, that poor little boy died, and so Joy's like, one of you did it. And then like Phil and Violet are looking at each other, and it's like, I think Violet's wondering whether Philip actually did it. Like, she knows on some level he did it, but I think she's going to do everything she can to protect him, because it's like, right, probably in her mind is like, I didn't do a lot to protect you from your father, and now we're under these circumstances. I don't know. Like I said, I think Lena was the one behind the wheel, and I think Philip's the one that did it. It could end up being Violet. I don't know, but just as broken as, like, you know, Frances was about everything with Marty, is like this family kind of got its comeuppance as well, with them kind of like being shattered because of this. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see what the next episode takes us. It is the season finale. Like I said, technically this would have been the season finale, but like once again, the AMC like cut these episodes up weirdly enough, so there's a 6th episode when in actuality there's only supposed to be 5, I believe. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see the aftermath, because it's all going to be about like, well, figuring out, because I'm about to say, like, in the grand scheme of things, I was like, is there enough time for like a full-blown episode? But I guess if you throw in commercial breaks, it compensates enough. But I'm like, because I know they cut off about like 11 or so minutes probably per episode, speaking, like, relatively speaking, probably even more so, probably looking at more like 15 or something. So that kind of builds up, even though that 15 gets passed on to one episode to the next. So like the 15 they already cut off from this, plus another 15 or so, like that should have been with this episode. You know, it works itself out to a certain extent. There's still kind of some wiggle room that I'm just curious, like, is the next episode going to be shorter or not? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what goes down. Regardless, like I said, I'm getting too caught up in all this. Like I said, ANC wise, it doesn't matter, because the story's still being told. It's just being a little expanded. It's just being, like I said, edited up from its original airing. But once again, that's just me getting caught up in semantics. It doesn't matter. You're still getting the same full-length story. But I'm so curious to see how this all plays out in the season finale. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.